I think this is a really fun exercise, and it's a really good way of learning how to build a bit of distance in by using weaker and stronger paints. So I'm going to show you how to do this morning. I'm going to be doing it in blue because I think it's a technique that you can use with any colour, in fact, actually, and it's really quite satisfying watching the layers build up. So you work from a sort of a weak tea sort of concentration of paint at the back, and then each layer that you put on gets progressively more intense in colour, but you're using the same colour throughout. So I've got myself set up here with a little pot of water, a little mixing bowl. I've got this is an oval wash brush, which is rather fun for putting lots of water on, and it's a size 1/2. I'm also using a round brush, which is a 12. And then later on, when I get down here and do more detail, which I'll put on later, I'm going to be using a smaller brush, which is a size 2. You don't want a really tiny brush. You need one with enough bristles that it will hold some paint. But yes, a smaller one. So it really doesn't matter what colour you choose to use, as long as you stick with the same paint all the way through. So let's get going. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wake up my paint. So I've got a square here of indigo, which is what I'm using at the moment. I'm going to dab a little bit of water on the top of that to wake it up. Give that a second. And I'm going to use my oval wash brush to just transfer some water into this little mixing bowl, because we want to start with a very, very weak concentration of paint, but I'm going to want quite a bit of paint because I need to cover the whole of the page. Okay, there's a little bit of purple along the bottom from the last painting, but I'm not too worried about that. That'll get covered up. And I'm using watercolour paper, which is really quite thick. So there we go. I'm just tickling the top of the paintbrush, the paint with the brush, and I'm just mixing up a very, very weak shade of indigo there. And it really does look like weak tea without any milk in it. If you like blue tea, of course. Okay, so that I think is great to start, because we really just want a very, very faint wash all over the paper to start with. Okay, there we go. Right, here we go. There we go. That's ideal. Just a suggestion of colour all the way down. I'm liking that. Keeping it moving, covering the whole page. Some people take their pages down to stop them buckling. I personally prefer not to, simply because I think that can cause trouble and end up with an uneven buckle rather than a straightforward natural buckle. And then you end up with little puddles of paint. Okay, so I'm going to sweep down, all the way down to the bottom there. Okay. Keep it moving until I'm satisfied that it's a relatively even cover. Right, I'm going to leave that to dry completely. Okay, I've left this for about 5-10 minutes, and you can see it's buckled up quite alarmingly there. Don't worry about that. Just hold your nerve and wait. Best to leave it undisturbed. It will eventually settle and go back down. While I'm waiting, I'm going to mix up a stronger concentration of the indigo. Not too much stronger, just a little bit. But I want to make sure I've still got plenty of paint, so extra water going in there too, so that I've got enough to cover the whole page like I did previously. There we go. I might add a little bit more water. And a touch more paint. It's a question of doing this by eye and just having a little bit of fun, really. There we go. So that is nice and dry now, and it's flattened out, and we're ready to go with the next layer. I'm just going to load up my size 12 brush, and I'm going to start about 1/3 of the way down, just by adding a little bit of indigo there. And I'm not going to put too much detail in, but I want plenty of paint because I want this to stay wet until I've managed to cover the entire page. So I'm going to keep adding. I'm not adding more water, I'm just adding more wet paint. If you add more water, you end up with what we call cauliflowers when the paint hasn't evenly distributed. So I just want to keep it moving And we're going to start up quite high and then come down low. So I've just put my horizon line there. That's obviously the background. And this is very much in the distance. So I'm going to carry on then with my oval wash brush and just pull that paint down evenly. I don't want to go over it too many times, just enough to encourage that bead of paint to come all the way down the page. I'm not going to go back into this at the top now because you can end up with any uneven coverage. I'm just going to leave that to dry. And one of the good things about this particular technique is it's the sort of thing that you can do in stages throughout the day. So if you've got lots of bitty jobs to do, you can do layers in between and keep coming back to them and adding more. So I'm just going to wait for that to dry. Resist the temptation to go in too early. This one is still very damp just up here, although the rest of it's dry. But if I go in at this point, I risk it all bleeding together. So I'm going to wait and spend the time mixing up a darker colour of paint for the next layer. I'm going to start on this side and start coming the other way. There we go. I still think it needs to be a bit darker, so I'm just going to mix a little bit more into it. There we go. That's a bit better. Flooding that. To bring that over here like that. Right. Yeah, slightly darker. There we go. Nice crisp line coming over here. It's not crisp enough there, so I'm going to leave that alone. Yeah, I've gone in too soon here, which is exactly what I warned you not to do. So it's not crisp enough. So this is how not to do it. I'm just going to pull that down and let that dry. And then I'll try doing that layer again once it's dried. Okay, so here you can see I've done exactly what I said not to do. I've gone in far too early and it's bled a little bit here. You haven't got a crisp line, certainly, and the distinction between the two is blurred. And I've ended up with a patchy finish because I rushed it. So I'm going to have another go at that. So don't panic. This sort of thing is very easily fixable. I just need to be patient, wait for it to completely dry, and then I'm going to redo this layer and it will be fine. So I've let that completely dry, and I've left it a lot longer than I needed to, just to make sure that it really is dry. And I'm going to go back into my paint at this point, and just do that line again. I'm covering the same line that I did before, and then coming down and going across to make sure I get a nice crisp line here. Okay, that's much better. So that's going to carry on along here. And like before, I'm trying to keep it wet, so keeping plenty of paint in there so that the bead is still visible. The bead is the shine that you get when it's wet, when the light hits it. And from that point on, I'm then going to drag that down, just as I did with the others. Keeping it moving while it's wet. Okay, so I am not going to go in and fidget at all with the top, even though it's tempting to do so. I'm just going to let that dry, and then we'll carry on with a third layer. Okay, so that's all dry now. You can see it's a little bit streaky down here. But again, that doesn't matter because the next layer going on is going to hide most of that. So I've got really quite a dark and intense mix of paint now. And I'm going to be putting a little bit more detail on with this layer. So I'm going to start not loading the brush up too much, but starting here, I'm putting lots of sort of spikier edge to it, so that it's a little bit like maybe trees. Again, keeping the bead of paint quite wet. I'm going to come down, keeping those spikes. There we go. Just so that it's a sort of a raggedier edge. Again, keeping it wet. I'm going to maybe do more of a curve for this one. Going right the way across, doing the horizon line at the moment. Shallower curve. And then down again. But it is the suggestion of a forest on that hillside, which is that little bit closer than the one we've been doing before. Okay, keeping the bead of the paint there and pulling down. I'm going to do one more layer. I mean, you can put as many layers in as you like. I'm going to do one more, which is very similar with the sort of spiky treetops coming in. And a suggestion that there's actually something on the hillside. And then after that, we'll be putting the final finishing touches to it. I haven't mixed up quite as much paint this time because I've got a much smaller area to cover. There we go. Okay. Try not to put your arm in the paint or your hand in the paint, and remember to keep it wet. And again, it's the pull down that's important. We can have a little bit of a rise there maybe, coming back down, a lot more detail, and a little bit more interest. Again, it's a little more uneven here as well. A bit more detail. Okay. And once again, I'm going to switch to my larger brush just to drag that paint down. Trying to do it in as simple move as possible, while it's all still wet. There we go. Okay, so that is completely dry, and I've switched now to my small brush, and I'm actually loading it with really quite concentrated paint because we want something really dark that's going to actually show up against this now. And I'm thinking now complete foreground. So we've obviously got the sky in the background, and we've got these mountains coming closer, trees in the background, and then more detailed trees here. And I just need something that's going to stand out, almost like a silhouette of grasses. You could actually do trees if you wanted. I'm thinking grass. And the trick with this is that you need the paint to be wet enough that it will move, but concentrated enough that it stands up in front of the layer that you've got down there already. And I'm using a round brush, and I'm using the very tip of it, so it's very, very gentle touch on the paper. Some thick shoots of grass, some not so thick. Little branches going off. It can take a little while to actually build this up. Again, it's something that you might want to do in a series of layers. But you're really starting at the bottom and sweeping upwards. It's a nice way of adding a little bit of texture as well to the page at this point. I've got quite a puddle of water sitting in my little block of paint there, which is keeping it activated. Try not to put your hand in it. You might find as it dries paler, and you might want to go over bits. And again, you're looking for layers and textures. Again, you can get more and more concentrated if you want at this stage. Your bits of grass don't always have to start at the bottom coming up. You can actually start a little bit higher up. Suggestion that maybe there is something lower down, but not too much. The danger, of course, is that it will blend in with your last layer of paint, but that doesn't matter. You're really just adding a suggestion of what might be there. I'm going to bring a few of these grasses up over that final layer. Not too many. Just a suggestion. Got to be brave at this point. Gets a little bit scary. But it's rather fun once you get your eye in. Little grassy bits off to the side. Being careful not to smudge anything. Just bringing up concentrated paint. You can keep working on this until you're satisfied that you like the depth of it. I've actually switched to a little miniature painting brush, which is a size 1. It's got a man-made fibre tip, and it's quite good for holding a reasonable amount of paint, even though it's very narrow. There we go. I quite like the way that that's coming out. Another nice simple touch that you might want to do is to go back into your paint and maybe pop a couple of little birds in the sky. So we start with a dot and flick over like that in a little V shape. Might put 3 of them in, I think. Just like that, one a little bit further away than this one. And then one here. Again, and a smaller one. There we go. So that is the finished piece up close. You can see all the grasses in the foreground down here. And you can obviously see the mountains going off into the distance and the lovely little birds in the sky, which is really very effective. And of course next to it, I've got the purple version there, which I think works as well. And you can decide whether you want to add the detail in or not. It's entirely up to you. I hope you've enjoyed that. I've certainly enjoyed the whole process. I found it very relaxing and I've really enjoyed sharing it with you.